Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Today we are going to start the Uniting Against Germany. But before I start my article, I just want to have a quick review of my yesterday's lecture. Yesterday I told you something about how the different states combined together under the leadership of Bismarck. Uh, the unification of Germany, he was the one who played the key role in the unification of Germany. How uh, he was leading the Prussian state, which were considered the largest state in the Central Europe, especially in reference to the German. One thing. Secondly, I told you his contribution to establishing a new type of foreign policy because he emphasized how to secure Germany and how to isolate France. For that perspective, he had a lot of, you can say, alliances with different countries. For instance, the very first thing he did with Russia and Austria-Hungary, it was Dreikesselband. I give you a lot of details about that. Then Triple Alliance, then Doyle Alliance. Then at the very end, and he signed a treaty with Russia, and it was Reassurance Alliance. So yesterday we talked a lot about the German, Bismarck, his foreign policy, uh, the strategic importance of Germany, how he successfully, he successfully played his cards to isolate France. But today we are going to start with uniting against Germany. And in 1890, the German Kaiser, I need to mention, Kaiser is a title. Like for Russian president, we use Tsar. For German, we have Kaiser. So Chancellor is a different thing, Prime Minister is a different thing, and we use the title Kaiser. In 1890, the German Kaiser Wilhelm II dismissed Bismarck as the Chancellor and embarked on a less cautious approach to foreign policy. This included actively seeking overseas possessions and developing the German Navy. These actions had the effect of pushing France, Russia, and Britain closer together. It was crystal clear. So many times I told you in my previous lectures, there is a natural rift between Germany and France. And one can even say that now these days one can say that it's a similar like you can say like India and Pakistan presently. So just a very quick key figure, Wilhelm II, 1859-1941. Wilhelm became Kaiser of Germany in 1888 and almost immediately came into conflict with his Chancellor Bismarck. Boastful and impetuous, Wilhelm was determined to increase German power despite Bismarck's warnings that this would lead to country's downfall. Wilhelm's popularity dwindled in the early years of the 20th century and he abdicated in 1918 towards the end of the First World War. So how? Now we are going to talk about how the different different alliances, basically different alliances were made. Just to make the foreign policy of German a setback. So Franco-Russian alliance 1894, when Wilhelm II allowed the reinsurance treaty to lapse in 1890, Russia left threatened. Despite the political differences between France and Russia, France was a republic while Russia was an absolute monarchy in which the Tsar exercised total control. The two countries had enjoyed a steadily improving relation. From 1888, France, desperate to avoid being isolated and fearing Germans' increasing power, provided Russia with cheap loans to finance improvement in the military capabilities. Both countries were afraid of what might result from the Triple Alliance, so they began negotiating for alliance of their own. Like the Triple Alliance, the resulting agreement, the France-Russia alliance, was a defensive one. It stated that if either country was attacked, the other would come to its aid. It was agreed that the France-Russian alliance would remain in place as long as the Triple Alliance exists. It's very easy to understand. It was basically, you can say it's a mutual understanding between France and Russia. Both Russia has a sort of fear. You know why? Because according to German foreign policy, German has had a tendency to closely relationship Austria-Hungary, because most of the population of Austria-Hungary, you can say, was German. As far as the language is concerned, all this area or the patch had the German language. Mostly, most of the population, they spoke German language at that time. One thing, and they are, so one can say that they are naturally, they have a natural alliance with each other. Austria and Germany. But as far as the Russia and France is concerned, they don't have anything in common. France was a republic, democracy was there, and obviously people have a lot of pride. But on the other side, Russia was a total, you can say, it's a monarchy. Tsar was practicing completely whatever he had in his mind. So there's a difference in the government. There are difference in the, as far as the rights of the people are concerned. All the things are entirely different. But still, just for the sake of a common or a mutual rival, they decided to close to each other, and they signed an alliance in 1894. And according to that alliance, I mean, if either France or Russia was attacked by any other country, so the other party would definitely help, uh, I mean, each other. This one thing. And secondly, the important point in this alliance was, this alliance was remained in intact unless until the Triple Alliance would be broke up. German naval development. The Britain remained largely uninvolved in the European affair during the last quarter of the 19th century. It means one can say that in 1875 to 1900, I mean, it doesn't have anything to do as far as the navy of Britain is concerned. Peace on the continent had enabled Britain to increase its overseas possessions without serious challenges. As an inland protected by its undisputed naval supremacy, Britain had adopted a policy of splendid isolation by which it stayed out of the European politics and concentrated on the expansion of its own empire. However, German's naval program caused panic in Britain. Germany had few overseas possessions to protect and could concentrate its naval forces in the North Sea. In contrast, the British Navy was dispersed around the globe to protect its empire. In response to German naval development, therefore, Britain embarked on its own building program, including the launch of the super battleship Dreadnought. In 1906, Germany responded in kind, and a naval arm race developed that only increased the tension between the two countries. So, it's all about how the German decided to enhance their naval capacity. Before he started its enhancement, it was confirmed that the British Navy had the supremacy over the globe, and German was restricted to a couple of areas, right? Only the northern part of the Europe side, or the northern sea. But as far as the British Navy is concerned, it dispersed to the whole globe, extending to Europe, to Africa, and Asia. The Anglo-Japanese alliance in 1902, already concerned by the reaction of the European powers to its involvement in the Boer War, the threat posed by the German naval development led Britain to depart from its isolationist policy and took towards forming alliance with other countries. The first example was the the Japanese alliance of 1902. This offered some protection to British possession in the Far East in the event of war. However, far more surprising, certainly to the Germans, was British attempt to gain increased cooperation with its traditional enemy, France. So, I mean, this we talk. I mean, before I still remember that Anglo-Japanese alliance, and it was a part of the policy when Japan became the power in Asia. I mean, British was the first country who engaged in an alliance with Japan, and as a result of that alliance, Japan was able to capture Port Arthur. Still, I remember that, and Korea, and a part of Manchuria as well. So this is all about, I mean, how Japan and British came closer to each other, just to make, I mean, a strong or a robust relationship between either each other, and just to protect their interest. Obviously, Britain had a strong navy, no doubt about that, but still, I mean, as I mentioned earlier, the British Navy had an extensive task to perform. I mean, have to take care of Europe, then Africa, then Asia, just to protect its interest in Far East Asia. British was desperate to find an alliance with some country, and Japan, who was at that particular moment was an increasing force, just uplifting its potential. So it was the right choice for Britain to have a hand in hand with Japan. the Entente Cordiale in 1904. Following the diplomatic talks between British and French officials in 1903, King Edward VII's successful visit to France in 1904 led to the Entente Cordiale. This was a series of agreements designed to settle a number of disputes that had long soured relation between the two countries. For example, France finally recognized British control of Egypt in exchange for the Britain's recognition of the French control in Morocco. The Entente Cordiale provided France with additional security against the threat from Germany and its Triple Alliance cohorts. For Britain, concerned by the massive growth in Germany's military capabilities, is effort an end to European isolation. So, British had an isolation policy, which was very successful for Britain for a long time, more than 2 decades. But and you know that when we talk about the scramble for Africa, it was British and the French which were, you can say, eager to go hand in hand with each other. I mean, against each other. So I mean, there is a long history of war between these countries over the scramble for Africa. But it was the time because both had a sort of threat from German advancement in navy. So both countries decided uh, to break the ice, and King Seven Edward VII, he decided to visit France for this perspective, just to have a close relationship with each other. I mean, forgot all their rivalries in the past. So as a result, they signed a treaty which was Entente Cordiale. Entente Cordiale was a series of agreements, and one of the very successful arguments in Entente Cordiale was the mutual understanding over a couple of areas. For instance, France was convinced to accept the control of British on Egypt, and as a result, I mean, just keep these sentences in your mind because they are the very vital. These sentences will, I mean, help you a lot to understand how the First World War started. And British was convinced to accept the control of French occupation on Morocco. So the Anglo-Russian Entente in 1907, just like France and Britain, Russia had become increasingly fearful of Germans' intentions and regarded the Triple Alliance as a major threat to its security. Russia was deeply concerned that Austria-Hungary and Germany intend to take over large part of the Balkans, threatening Russian access through the Dardanelles, a vital trade route that accounted for 40% of Russian exports. Russia was a vast country and potentially had the largest army of all the major European powers. However, it was economically underdeveloped, and in defeat in the Russo-Japan War highlight the major deficiencies in any army hindered by ineffective leadership and obsolete equipment. For Britain, Russian defeat suggested that the country was no longer a series of challenger to its own imperial ambitions in the Far East. Germany was now a much bigger threat. In 1907, therefore, the Anglo-Russian Entente was agreed. So according to this Anglo-Russian Entente, again we need to go in detail a bit. I mean, uh, no doubt about that. Russia was a very vast country having a lot of potential, but after losing a war against Japan in 1905, I mean, the Russian threat was almost over for Britain. So Britain decided to have a strong relationship with Russia because it simply wants to enhance its opportunity to be the leader in the Europe. And by signing treaties with different countries like Japan, like France, and like Russia, so one can say that it's the same the Bismarck did in the late 19th century. Just try to isolate the enemy. But in this perspective, or as I mentioned earlier, Germans signed the Triple Alliance. So it was the turn for British, France, and Russia to join together against the Triple Alliance. So parallel to Triple Alliance, there was Triple Entente. It's Triple Entente, it's almost, you can say, the same thing. The Triple Entente in 1907, the Anglo-Russian Entente effective tied France, Britain, and Russia together in a series of friendly alliances by which the three countries agreed to support each other in the event of any of them being attacked. This became known as the Triple Entente. By 1907, therefore, Europe was divided into two opposing camps. The Triple Alliance, led by Germany, and the Triple Entente, although both had been created by defensive purposes. Each side was deeply suspicious of the aims and the motives of the other. As this mistrust grew, the arm race became considerably more sinister. So, obviously, on the page, one can say that it was simply the precautionary measures the both camps were doing, trying their level best to secure their side. I mean, the Triple Entente, in Triple Entente, we got France, Britain, and Russia. On the other hand, we have Triple Alliance, and Triple Alliance we have Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy. So all these countries were desperate just to put pressure on other side, just try to make other side more defensive. The road to war. Cassius Wilhelm Zweig was convinced that the Triple Entente was a conspiracy to encircle that subsequently attacked Germany. In 1930, fearful of a combined French and Russian invasion, Germany began increasing its standing army. Austria-Hungary did the same, and the French interpreted this as the start of the preparation to attack France itself, and in response extended their compulsory military services from 2 to 3 years. They had increased expenditure on weapons. With financial assistance from France, Russia began rebuilding its armed forces and developing better transport system to help with more rapid mobilization in the event of war. By 1910, France, Russia, Austria-Hungary, and Germany had all developed offensive plans to be deployed if and when war broke out. Indeed, the German plan had been developed by the military strategist Alfred von Schlieffen as early as 1904. So the road to war, it's all about how the preparation started, how the suspicion created between the countries, between the two different camps. I mean, the development in the weapon race, they simply, it's proving to be ignition to lead to a war. The period from 1907 to 1914 witnessed an uneasy peace in Europe. In many ways, the alliance system seems to be serving the purpose for which it had originally been intended, preventing rivalry, relatively minor incidents escalating into full-scale war. In 1911, for example, when France sent troops to put down a rebellion in Morocco, Germany sent a gunboat in protest, a clear threat of war. Britain announced that it would support France over this issue, made the Germans back down. In truth, Britain was acting out of self-interest rather than a duty to enforce its formal commitment to France. Gaining control of a Moroccan port would have provided the German Navy with a base from which to threaten British trade routes. So there's one more point to understand. In 1911, there was a event or an incident which alerted both camps properly, and it was, I mean, obviously, as I told you the in my last uh, in my last paragraph, we were talking about how the France and the Britain leadership close to each other and signed a couple of agreements. According to that treaty, I mean, it is possible whenever there is a chance of attack on France, so Britain would support it. And as a result, I still remember that the British accepted the control of France over Morocco. So Morocco was considered to be the part of France, one of the colonies of France. So when there was a rebellion in Morocco and French troops were sent just to crush the rebellion, and Germans sent a gunboat. It was a sign of, you can say, sign of interest that German was entrusted to support the people who are involved in the rebellion. So close, I mean, so close, and the British decided to send a message to Germans. I mean, they need to go back because otherwise British was ready to you can say to give the proper response and support the France. And I must say one thing. I mean, it is we need to understand that it was the personal interest of Britain. It was not the services he had committed to France. That if the France was attacked, then they would obviously support France. Rather than it is more appropriate if German was able to capture Moroccan port. So it is sort of defense. It's a sort of hurdle for the British Navy to cross through the land for the trade purpose. It was the vested interest of the Austria-Hungary and Russia that finally ended the fragile peace. The Austria-Hungary Empire was a mixture of many different nationalities, the ethnic groups including Germans, Hungarians, Czech, Poles, Serbs, Ruthenians, Romanians, Croats, Slovaks, Italian, and and so on. Many of these groups had been demanding independence from the empire for last some years, but Serbia posed the biggest threat to Austria-Hungary unity. Serbian nationalists increasing claim that those parts of the Habsburg land that contain a predominantly Serbs population should become a part of Greater Serbia. If Austria-Hungary gave in so much demand, uh, it would undoubtedly lead to spread the nationalism elsewhere within the empire, and with devastating result. So one of the issues, no, see, the second point which can lead to the war was the rift between, it is kind of, you can say, the nationalism which were, I mean, started to grow in Austria-Hungary. Austria-Hungary was a big empire, a vast empire, and there were so many ethnic groups, so many, you can say, nationality which were there, and Serbs were the greatest threat to the Austrian-Hungary. So we need to understand there was a threat between Russia and Austria-Hungary, and the threat was based on the Balkan states, Romania, Serbia. So all these ethnic groups, they were desperate to have independence from Austria-Hungary. So Russia was trying to help the Balkan states just to get rid of Austria-Hungary, just to have an independence. So there was a chance of a war between these two countries. So Serbian people, Serbian nationalists, they were keen to do something to get independence from Austria-Hungary, just try to establish a big scale country, the Greater Serbia. So it was a threat, and Russia was supporting, I mean, the revolutionaries in the Austria-Hungary. So it was therefore in Austria-Hungary's interest to remove this problem. The same. Okay, so it was therefore in Austria-Hungary's interest to remove this problem by going to war with Serbia. The problem was how Russia would react to this move. The Russian would see a declaration of war as an attempt by the Austria-Hungary to extend its empire in this area. Obviously, Russia wasn't happy to give a chance to Austria-Hungary to put a lot of stuff, to put you can say, put pressure on Serbia. So there was a hate and aid from Russia to the Serbian people just to establish independence from Austria-Hungary Empire. Sometimes it's difficult to be, it's outside very cold. The Russian could see a declaration of war as attempt to the Austria-Hungary to extend its empire in the area, desperate to return its warm water access from the Black Sea to the Mediterranean through the Dardanelles. Russian would undoubtedly support Serbia in an attempt to prevent problem escalating into a full-scale war. Both Britain and Germany used their influence to restrain Austria-Hungary. This willingness of the Britain government to cooperate with Germany over this issue led the Germans to believe that British could be detached from its alliance with France and Russia. Even as late as 1930, Germans were arguing Austria-Hungary not to go to war with Serbia. So this was all the escalating, all the events which were escalating the situation more and more, and we are supposed to be very close to be a war, to start a war. The situation reached at a critical point in June 1914 when a Serbian nationalist assassinated the heir to the Austrian-Hungarian throne, Archduke Ferdinand, in Sarajevo. Austria-Hungary resolved to crush the Serbian once and for all, and the German now encouraged this course of action. It seemed that the very system of alliance had been established to provide peace and security now made a full-scale war inevitable. So basically the thing, or the event which triggered the war, was the assassination of Ferdinand. He was the Archduke of Austria-Hungary. He was killed by a nationalist in Sarajevo. In July 1914, Austria-Hungary issued Serbia with a series of demands, believing that these threatened its independence. Serbia refused to accept all of them. Consequently, on 28 July, Austria-Hungary declared war on the Balkan nation. The following day, Russia began mobilizing its force and shortly afterward declared war in defense of Serbia and to protect its own interest in the region. Germany issued an ultimatum to Russia, demobilizing or face war with Germany as well. Russia refused to back down. Germany had declared war on Russia, and due to the necessity outlined by the Schlieffen Plan on France too, when German troops entered Belgium on their way to attack France, Britain honored its 1839 commitment to defend Belgium neutrality and declare war on Germany. In the capitals of Europe, the outbreak of the First World War was greeted almost with a sense of relief. Tensions had been simmering for years, and by this point, most nations both expected war and had prepared for it. The long period of uncertainty was finally over in 1914. However, few could have predicted that it would be a war unlike any of the world had seen before. Certainly, no one could have foreseen the impact it would have on the international relations for the remainder of the 20th century. So it's all we had. I mean, how the war started. As I mentioned earlier, the triggering event was the assassination of the Archduke Ferdinand. He was murdered. He was assassinated by one of the nationalists, the Serbian nationalists. So basically what happened, Austria-Hungary send a series of demands to the Serbians, to hand over the person and do certain things. Serbia refused to do so. So Austria-Hungary declared a war on Serbia. Just to protect its interest in the region, Russian came forward in defense for Serbia, right? So German was there to simply ask Russia to out of the game, because it was it wasn't anything Russia should involve in the war. So Russia refused to do so. So basically what happened, Germans provided aid to Austria-Hungary just to kill Serbian rebellion, one thing. But Russia was there to support Serbia. Why? Because he has an interest in the Balkan states. Second, and as the Russia decided to take part, we had a plan, Schlieffen Plan. According to Schlieffen Plan, what was the plan? It was the plan you can simply stretch your army towards different direction. For instance, in the west, German can take over France and Belgium. Then in the east, the Balkan states are the Russia, you can say. So it is a plan basically that you can simply stretch your army towards the different direction to capture maximum land in no time. So German aided Austria-Hungary, declared war on Russia. Russia wasn't ready to accept all the demands by the Germans, so he was on the side of Serbia. He was on the side of Serbia. So as per Schlieffen Plan, Germans sent their troops to Belgium to take over France through Belgium. So according to a treaty or a commitment in 1839, which was made by the British to the Belgium, so they played their part and they declared a war on Germany. So this is how a war broke out. It was the First World War. Obviously, people were not expecting the large scale casualties, the events which can lead to the destruction of so many countries, the killing of millions of people in that First World War. So it simply started from 1914, extended to 1918. In the last lecture, that my inshallah ta'ala tomorrow, I will tell you the whole conclusion of this chapter, and there must be a sort of debate. We will inshallah ta'ala discuss tomorrow about who was responsible for the for breaking out the First World War. Either it was German or the different alliances were made just to protect their own interest, or it was some you can say unexpected events which happened, which triggered the First World War. Till then, Jazakallah and Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.